We asked you what stereotype was true about HBS. Can you tell us what's the stereotype that you heard about HBS or HBS students that proved to be totally false?
Yeah, I think the stereotype that the classic one that everybody is like an asshole or rich, it's like, look, you'll encounter, if you took 1,000 people, you'll meet a rich asshole eventually, right? They exist.
Hello, everyone. This is How Did You Get In, a conversational podcast with people who got into the world's top business schools. We'll be talking with these applicants, hearing about their tips, tricks, and secrets to success. We welcome you to the show.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to the How Did You Get In podcast. My name is Alex Newber, Harvard Business School grad of 2021.
And I'm Julia Laughlin. I was in Alex's section and also MA graduate of Harvard Business School from 2021.
And we're bringing to you a podcast that's focused on real life experiences and applications from people who got into top business schools, including ourselves.
We are so excited you're all here, and we are delighted to introduce our first guest.
Joining us today is Tyrel Sulzer, a current second-year student at Harvard Business School. Not only is he smart, charismatic, and incredibly witty, but he also happens to be the fiance of my lovely co-host, Julia. So welcome, Tyrel. We're so happy to have you here with us today.
To kick this off, we want to share with all of our listeners a little bit more about your background. We want to hear where you're from, where you went to undergrad, and what you were doing in the years prior to applying.
Sure. Thanks for having me on the program. I'm a Canadian originally. I grew up in a small town in Fernie, British Columbia. It's a little ski and mining town south of Banff or near Calgary. And I grew up there, born and raised. I went to undergrad at the University of British Columbia. Western Canada, we make forestry products, oil and mining products. So I chose geological engineering to cover two of those. I went to go work for a company called Imperial Oil, a subsidiary of ExxonMobil, before going to business school. And I spent 4 years working up north on an oil sands project as a geotechnical engineer there. And so that's what I did before business school. And that's what brought me to Boston eventually.
And do you mind sharing with the listeners your stats? For example, your GMAT score, your undergrad GPA, and what your job title was at the time of application.
Yeah, so GMAT, I had a 740 GMAT score. I had a 8.8 or 8 out of 8 in integrated reasoning. GPA coming out of undergrad, UBC does out of a percentage basis. So I had an 83 percentage basis, and I think that translates to a 3.85 or something like that.
And you said you were working for 4 years, or I guess 3 years by the time that you were actually writing the application, and 4 years when you came to school. Is that true?
That's right. Yeah. 4 years by the time I entered school. Yeah. And my title
Right.
there was, geotechnical engineer, which is pretty standard for oil and gas.
And when applying, did you use a professional consultant?
I had a professional consultant look over my essay at the end, just to make sure I hadn't, missed anything. But at the end of the day, I basically relied on friends who'd walked the path to guide me.
And how many schools did you ultimately apply to?
I applied to 3. I applied to Harvard, Wharton, and Chicago Booth.
Oh, I was going to say, if it was Harvard, Wharton, and Stanford, gosh, you're so original.
Seriously. Well, and you got to tell us the follow-up. Where'd you get in?
I got into Harvard. Goes without explaining. I did not get into Wharton, and I got waitlisted at Chicago Booth.
Fascinating.
Amazing. Well, it seems like it's all worked out just fine. So, as part of this podcast, our goal is to really demystify the application process. And everyone can look at the averages of all of these stats online. But what's harder to get a sense of is, what do people write about in their personal stories? And we had the privilege of reading your essay. And I know I'm your fiance, so I have to say this, but it was really amazing. So would you mind reading it for the audience so they can hear a little bit about your, how you crafted your story for Harvard?
Yeah, sure. Reading out loud is, everybody's greatest fear. So here we go. The The question you might be familiar with at Harvard Business School is, as we review your application, what more would you like us to know as we consider your candidacy for the Harvard Business School MBA program? So I start with a quote. I go, Sulzer, you're up next. Remember your training? Barked my sergeant in the pitch black Canadian wilderness of northern Alberta. I quickly replied, yes, sergeant, and moved to take the lead in my section. It was 0-200 hours on a navigation exercise during my Army basic military training course. I was tired, cold, and the youngest member of my section at 16 years old. I entered the Canadian Forces through a program for indigenous Native Canadian youth called Bold Eagle. In that moment, my section trusted me to guide them back to camp and end a truly challenging but valuable field day. I was nervous because of this pressure, but also the fix bayonets command from our sergeant due to reported black bear activity in the area. Luckily, I had a knack for navigation, and I began leading the troops through the thick bush. In a few hours, we reached camp. I was silently relieved. In this moment, I found a passion for leadership and witnessed the ability of a team to achieve great things when bound by mutual trust. Today, I aspire to found and lead an Indigenous-owned energy company and believe business school will equip me with the training necessary to succeed. Western Canada is facing economic stagnation due to a complicated relationship with Indigenous people, federal and provincial governments, and resource industries. As an Indigenous Canadian who now works for the energy sector, I wish to untangle this adversarial relationship. I aspire to build a prosperous, environmentally conscious business that is a model for success in the region. Growing up in a small coal mining town in the Rocky Mountains, I've watched and been a part of the family tradition of mining. I've been a beneficiary of the scholarships and employment opportunities offered by oil, mining, and forestry industries. Where most people are frustrated and only see problems, I see an opportunity to both improve the lives of Indigenous Canadians and protect the environment. Canada has always been a place of vast resources, and our history with Indigenous people swings wildly between cooperation and conflict. My great-grandfather was caught in the middle as a Métis half-blood fur trader who was able to create advantageous relationships for both First Nations and colonial people. My grandmother dedicated her life to the advancement of Métis rights and cultural preservation. These values of respect, shared purpose, and connection to our First Nations cousins are the foundation of my upbringing. This background has allowed me to consider the human elements of business in Canada and break free of the introverted engineering stereotypes. I'm never afraid to approach or engage with people who oppose my viewpoint and search for common ground. I've experienced what it's like to turn open conflict into a productive, trust-focused relationship. In 2017, I was assigned to a field rotation at a $25 billion CapEx oil sands mining project near Fort McMurray, Alberta. I was tasked with planning and working closely with our 500 plus person operations group. And after a turbulent asset startup, these employees were extremely frustrated and distrustful of any new engineering staff. Guidance from the planning team was frequently discredited and deemed impossible to execute. My father, previously an underground coal miner, advised me to spend time with the team. Determined to succeed, I spent hours with the field staff and their trucks and equipment to learn their point of view. Soon, I adapted my planning efforts and gained respect amongst them. Within the year, I received a recognition award from the, quote, most feared operations superintendent for improving our relationship. The accomplishment meant more to me than the paper was written on because it showed I'd earned the trust of the people who inherently disliked my position and background. My ability to empathize and overcome being the most hated person in the room has served me well in tense situations. Recently, I volunteered at an Indigenous Youth Summit that brought students from across Canada to discuss energy issues. I was seated next to a young woman named Brianna, who was jailed the week prior for protesting a natural gas pipeline project. When I introduced myself as an ExxonMobil employee, she expressed her disgust by saying, "Your company ignores our people and threatens Mother Earth." I stuck to my values and replied, "Look, I believe in Indigenous territorial control, and I'd like to hear why you feel that way." We soon found common ground on issues of sovereignty and respect for promises made to Indigenous people by companies and governments. Her point of view was a window into a complicated issue, but it helped me frame a meaningful strategy for cooperation, respect, and shared purpose. Recent Canadian legal outcomes on resource projects have cemented the reality that business in Canada equals business with Indigenous people. The relationship has advanced beyond the mere cutting of a royalty check. Indigenous people are concerned with the long-term benefits and consequences of economic activity in their backyard. As someone who has lived on both sides of this equation, community and company, I have enjoyed the benefits and observed the consequences of resource development. I aspire to be a new type of business leader, one who can understand the broader perspective of indigenous people as well as asset profitability. Fundamentally, I believe acting on your values and beliefs builds trust. Business school will help me round out my experience in areas where I have little experience, such as finance, law, negotiation. My passion for operations management and indigenous relations will be furthered by courses like social entrepreneurship and innovation and authentic leadership development. The very backgrounds of other students will provide insights into indigenous relations in the business around the world. When a former colleague and HBS alum, Chris Kissel, invited me to visit in 2017, I witnessed the sharing of unique perspectives in the classroom and became engrossed in the fast-paced discussion environment. The robust number of clubs and student activities like the Energy Environment Club, Outdoors Club, and the hockey team, the HBS Blades, greatly interest me. I intend to found and lead an Indigenous-owned energy company so that our people can forge their own future. I want to navigate that business through the woods of an adversarial relationship to the financial success and independence. I want to replace being the most hated person in the room with an invitation to equitable partnership. I want to become a role model for responsible development and transparency in my country and across my industry. I believe business school is my next step in this journey.
Awesome.
That was amazing.
Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah.
No, that was eye-opening.
And you got over your fear of reading out loud. So
no, it was excellent. And I feel like even though I know you well and Alex knows you well, it's always fun to read these essays and hear them because you just get to know someone so much better. So I guess before we jump into our questions, how do you feel now? It's been 2 years. Like, how do you think back and look at that essay now that you've just read it out loud to all of us?
Yeah, I think, this is the product of a lot of revisions and thinking about it. And it's so hard to sum up your life story and your life goals. And, looking back at it, there's absolutely parts that have stayed true, but there's also parts that coming out, towards the end of this experience that have changed a little bit. So reflecting on that, I think is telling, but also kind of fun.
Yeah, for sure. My perspective after reading it and hearing you speak it, I think it was really strong in hitting on what HBS is looking for. From my perspective, what I've seen in my classmates and how I felt throughout the application process, they're really looking for leaders, and you're showing that you've already had to overcome really complex leadership obstacles and challenging interpersonal dynamics. And they're also looking for driven people who not only know what their goals are, but you can actually back that up to make it sound genuine, believable, and clearly shaped by personal experiences. And you even mentioned in your essay, when you went to a class, seeing the unique perspectives that students bring. And I felt that you really highlighted that you would definitely bring a unique perspective. I'm curious, so that's kind of my take. If I were to be an admissions analyst, what do you think set your essay apart for people in admissions office?
Yeah, I think, ultimately you're trying to tell a story. So previously I'd read the materials about, there's a great book called 50 Successful Harvard Business School Essays. And the ones that stuck out the most genuine to me were the ones that started with a story and kind of ended with a point. And I think that's what I tried to do. I think one of the myths is that you're competing against everybody in investment banking and private equity or a consultant. And I knew I wasn't one of those. Why I think that's a myth is you're actually probably competing against someone else in your category. So another engineer, maybe from Canada, maybe in the oil and gas sector. So I think what I tried to do was highlight something that was unique about me, a unique perspective I had. Which I think is why, I leaned in hard to talking about how I feel about Indigenous sovereignty and Indigenous equity. So I think that perhaps pulled me out of the pile a little bit, in addition to having a very visual story to talk about.
It's funny you say that. I also started my essay with a quote and ended on like a similar note, and also had bought that book of the 50 successful HBS essays.
Alex, you're teasing all the listeners with your essay, and you're not going to read it today. They'll have to wait until the essay, the episode focused on you. So, I'm curious. The essay is one component of the application. How did you think about using the different elements of the application, the essay, your recommenders, the short answer? How did you think about what you wanted to convey in each piece? Maybe starting with the essay. What were the things that you wanted to come through the essay, and then maybe some of the things that you wanted to save for short answer and resume?
Yeah, I think so. The essay was inherently like, there's something unique here, and if you put me in a room with 100 other people or 90 other people, I'll say something kind of unique. The energy angle, you can expect how I feel about oil prices and the carbon tax, but the indigenous sovereignty piece is a little bit unique. So I think that's something that the essay can bring out that GMAT scores won't, and grades and some of the short answer stuff as well. So I think that was the difference.
How long did it take you from your first draft or even the idea of what you wanted to write to the final draft that you submitted?
Yeah, it took me probably a whole summer. So I think, I finished the GMAT, I got that score, but then I probably spent from like May through to September working and reworking it. I think the file saved as V8, but there were many more in between, tweaks.
And another question that we think is pretty important is, who did you have read your essay during that time period? What was the right balance of the number of voices? What was some of the feedback you got from people who read it?
Great question. I think, I had a ton of people read it. I had my parents read it. My roommate at the time was a lawyer who read it. I had family members, colleagues read it. And I think, there was no one who gave the same advice. And some people who looked at this and went like, well, that's silly. Like, they won't understand that. And I think, you have to walk away being like, okay, this is like something that I believe in and I stand by, and they can kind of detect that, especially when you get to the interview phase. So, had a whole number of people read it. But just, I think the more people that read it, be ready for more of the commentary. That's not like, great job, I love it.
Well, and you mentioned you had a consultant read sort of your application at the end. Did the consultant read this essay, and from what was the professional feedback on it?
I think the consultant kind of just said, yeah, looks great. So maybe not the best advertisement for consultants. I appreciate that was what the confidence I needed to basically submit this. A couple of things, I think they liked the fact that it's a story, it fit the format, the length. There's a couple of moments in that essay that maybe grabbed your attention a little bit. Where I go from some story to basically being like, Western Canada's facing economic stagnation. That's wait a minute, hang on. Also, appreciated the like smaller sentences. I think that plays really well. Perhaps not to the like spoken word, but when you're reading it, it breaks things up. It's not a big run on.
And was this your first topic, or did you take a pass at an essay that was entirely different and scrapped it?
Yeah, I think, I had a kernel of it, wanting to touch on some things that were unique, but certainly a number of revisions and paragraphs that went through. I had recounted a couple of stories at, the mine site I'd worked on where, there things went wrong, and either my planning or mistakes were made. And those are all great stories, but I think at the end of the day, I trimmed it down to what I thought would make me unique.
In your essay, you talk with a lot of clarity and I think pretty eloquently about wanting to go back to work in Canada and as you say, bridge corporate and community. How has that vision changed since being at school? And when you wrote that, what level of certainty did you have? How would you have to paint a picture of where you want to go. What's changed and how certain were you at the time when you wrote it?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Leading question from my fiance about it, because of course, you couldn't have predicted in that. So I think the answer is, look, it all changes, right? You're looking for a transformational experience. I think what I was very certain, and I still am certain about, the beliefs I wrote about in that essay. I think the path will change. That's something that you probably shouldn't think too hard about. I think people are nervous about sharing their essay or talking about it because they haven't lived up to that path. If you were to take this at face value, you would say, well, Tyrel, why aren't you working in energy right now and in Indigenous relations group? And I think that's not really the intention of the essay or the point of the school in some way. Like, I think they understand that, there's a number of paths to get there, to get that dream, but they kind of really want to see, okay, who is this person? What are their values? What makes them unique? Where are they going to end up, 40 years down the line when we have a list of alumni? And they want to make as many bets as they can to have impactful, alumni, while still preserving some stats and, making sure that everyone lands on their feet in the near term. So I think that's probably what I was.
And you had mentioned earlier, you were, by the time you started, 4 years out of school. Why was that the right time for you to apply?
Yeah, maybe I'll give a personal take, which is I was ready for a change. I had a promotion that put me up at site and more often to be at up north. I'd gotten comfortable in that role, but I also feel like I'd kind of achieved everything I needed to up there. I'd learned what I could, and it was starting to become repetitive. So personally, I was ready for that change. Maybe institutionally, I think I'm on the earlier end, but I think the stats probably show it's also like, in like 4 to 8 year, time frame that, people tend to apply. And so I knew that there was this window of, okay, if we're talking to M7 schools, it's probably within this window that I need to make an application.
And you mentioned applying to 3 schools. How did you decide on those 3? Why not the others? Did 3 seem like the right number for you?
Yeah, I think this was on the advice of a colleague. I think, it depends on your situation, but 3 schools is a good number for me and maybe for most people, because really, I think the bottleneck is your references. So each of these schools, you have to get 2 references and they have to write a short essay. And you might not think it, but that's really the hard part that comes down to the deadline, is making sure that, they feel informed and motivated. You have to often remind them a few times. And if you're applying to 6 schools, it's kind of onerous to come to your supervisor and be like, hey, can you write 6 different essays?
I applied to 6 schools and had the same manager write all 6. So I'll have to send him an apology letter after this.
Never too late for a gift basket, Julia.
Yeah. And I think, 3 around is pretty manageable. Otherwise, you're running around to a lot of interviews, and each interview you need to try and make it like, this is the only school for me, right? Is kind of what they want to hear a little bit. So if you're applying to 6 schools and you get offers from all 6 and you have to go interview them, it's easy to get caught up in the noise and forget, what makes HBS special, what makes Wharton special, and actually have it be genuine. So you're not just citing, the case method, et cetera.
And did you feel like you were pretty consistent application to application, or did you have to make sizable changes to your essays or application materials based on the school?
Yes, I kept it. Well, it is different. I think I made a mistake in keeping it the same. So I basically wrote the Harvard essay first, which was probably not the right way to do it. Wharton and Booth have a different process where it's kind of like 2 questions that they ask. So I kind of just chopped up my essay from the Harvard one and then, made it work for those ones. I was invited to interviews in both, and who knows what happened behind the scenes, but was not successful at those. So I think if you want to maximize success, you might be better to, start with an idea or start fresh on either one.
We're going to ask for words of wisdom on the process as a whole and approaching the application process. But before we move off of the essay, in addition to the 50 essays book that you mentioned, what resources or advice did you find the most valuable as you sat down to write your essay?
I think the most valuable resource is someone who's been through the experience, who's been successful, or multiple people. I think, I had a mentor who was ahead of me a couple of years, who was just totally invaluable in just kind of understanding what to expect. He invited me to come and visit, which then later allowed me to demonstrate kind of my commitment to the school. So I think anytime you can reach out, find somebody with some sort of similar background. I had a fellow Canadian message me on LinkedIn and say he was going to be in Boston, and this is kind of at the height of COVID, and he worked at Pepsi and came and visited for the day, and I was so happy to just tour him around, and would recommend try and find somebody who's connected to the community and understand some of the nuances that you can't find on Wall Street Oasis or Poets and Quants.
That is such a good nugget of advice. Just to reiterate it is don't hesitate to reach out to people. And I think in particular, your targeted approach, finding someone to say, hey, I'm an engineer from Canada, just like you, and I want to be like you. I think you feel connected to them. And I'm sure there's a little bit of flattery too. So thank you for sharing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say people may not always have the time, but I feel like they're always flattered when you ask for advice. And then I'm curious, so you speak very clearly about your why in your essay. Is that your actual why? Is there, more to the why that maybe isn't safe for application?
Yeah, I think, that's a great question. Of course, it's a holistic answer, right? I think you'd be kind of foolish to think like, okay, I'm applying to an M7 business school. This isn't going to, improve my job's, potential or my earnings capability or something like that. But I think with, the essay is an opportunity to say that I get it, that there's a bigger picture that, if you're endowed with this, kind of somewhat of an advantage, coming to an M7 school, that you're going to use it for something that's meaningful. And I think the myth is that it has to happen immediately. But it's that you have this kind of clear vision or something you take a stake on, and that's what they're looking for.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Okay, well, while this is a podcast really focused on it, how to get into these schools and a peek behind the curtain, we also do want to hear about your experience. So I guess at a very high level, you spent, it seems like, a ton of time and effort. Was it worth it?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, obviously he has to say that because he wouldn't have met me otherwise. But tell us a little bit more. I guess if you had to highlight a couple of the things that you feel like you've gotten out of this experience so far, and we know you've still got about half a semester left. What are the key things that you feel like you've gotten out of this last 2 years?
Honestly, like, people always ask, okay, COVID, how has it changed? Has it diluted the experience? And I think the answer is yes. Yeah, absolutely it has. But, life in general was diluted a little bit. It wasn't a choice between the normal world for anybody. So what do I think I got out of it is, even despite, a global crisis or a global pandemic, I found a group of friends from a variety of industries with very different outlooks on the world. I found a career that I want to pursue that I hadn't considered, and a totally new way of thinking about the world, global capital flows, socioeconomic considerations. So all that part has been, all those has been amazing. I think the part that maybe surprises some people too is they think, okay, MBA school, like, I'm going to walk out with a great job, but the academics are top notch at all these top schools. You'll be blown away. And if you do dig into the material a little bit, you'll enjoy it. But that said, it's also not as rigorous as maybe, TV and movies make it out to be. It's kind of, pick your adventure as far as how hard you want to work in that regard.
Great. So now maybe some rapid fire questions. An HBS interview question that took you by surprise.
There was, a question that I think it's similar to like the what's your weakness, but it was posed in a really good way about, what does your boss think about you? What would a peer think about you? What would someone who doesn't like you, or not think you're the best at work say about you? And that's an opportunity to kind of reveal one of those weaknesses and be a bit more humble about your application.
All right. What stereotype about HBS has proven true?
I think all the travel, social stuff, if that's what you're looking for, you'll find it.
Can you tell us what's the stereotype that you heard about HBS or HBS students that proved to be totally false?
Yeah, I think the stereotype that like the classic one that everybody is like an asshole or rich, it's like, look, you'll encounter, if you took 1,000 people, you'll meet a rich asshole eventually, right? They exist, but it's not like all of them, it's like, very, very few. So I think that's the myth.
I second that for sure. Anything you'd do differently on your application if you had a do-over? Sounds like maybe not just copy and pasting HBS to Wharton and Booth.
Yeah, I would have been more specific to the other schools. Yeah, I think that's probably it. Take more time on your second and third choice.
What doubts about yourself did you have going into the application?
So many. Yeah. You'll go through the whole period of, am I worthy? What happens if it's a no, etc. Yeah. And even once you get accepted, or you'll feel that way.
Who's the coolest alumni or class guest that you either attended class with or even got to meet and shake their hand?
Yeah.
Or wave at with COVID, maybe.
For sure. Yeah. Most interesting. We had Andy Fastow, was the CFO of Enron, come in. He was really interesting. Gave a whole bunch of light. Superstardom. We had Toto Wolff of F1 fame come in last week. That was really cool too. That was fun.
That I was particularly jealous about.
All right, let's hear it. What's been your most embarrassing moment so far at business school?
Yeah, probably like week one, I was talking to a colleague who came from private equity, done investment banking. And so I came from Northern Oil Patch. I'd only watched the like HBS prep finance videos. And it was a British instructor. And so she pronounced EBITDA, EBITDA. And so when I was talking with this private equity fellow from New York, I said something about EBITDA, and he kind of like, paused for a second, and it was like, it's EBITDA. And I was like, oh, okay, thanks. So that was a little embarrassing. We all got over it, but yeah.
Love it. Introvert or extrovert?
Extrovert.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Are you a procrastinator, or do you get it done ahead of time?
Depends on what it is. I think when it's scheduling like a doctor's appointment or something like that, or calling my grandma when I should, it's probably a procrastinator. When it's something more related to school or work stuff or interviewing, definitely a planner.
Analytical or creative?
I think analytical, probably. That's the engineering bias.
But you do have creative ideas. I will give you that.
Yes, we're going to do another podcast entirely focused on Tyrel's business ideas. I'm not going to give any away right now. Would you describe yourself cautious or bold?
Cautious in that I went to like a traditional M7 MBA path, but bold in that I didn't go into consulting or investment banking and chose search fund.
Ooh, good answer.
If you're a Harry Potter fan, what would your Hogwarts house be?
Slytherin.
It's true. It would be Slytherin. So when you're asked in a formal setting, like a job interview, what do you say your biggest weakness is?
Yeah, I think formally you say something like, I don't like to be micromanaged, because that is really a strength of being an independent thinker or something like that.
What's your actual like real weakness?
Yeah, I think I can get overconfident and really believe in my viewpoint.
Does that ring a bell, Juliet?
I plead the fifth.
Anything you regret about your business school experience?
Not really. It's been great. No, I think there's always certain things. I think, at the beginning, you're trying to meet as many people as possible, and then you get put into these sections. And I think it's tough to like reach cross section around that, or these social structures that are imposed. But I think if I was to go back again, I'd spend a little more time on that, because in the second year it kind of unravels, and for the rest of your life it unravels. You're not just in column, or section A, B, C, etc. It's cross. So spend more time doing that up front.
And last but not least, in the rapid fires, if you had to pick a new mascot for HBS, what would it be?
Sheryl Sandberg.
Can you say more? We're going to give you more room here, because that's a fascinating answer.
Yeah, I think, it's not some caricature, animal. It's, it's a real person who has changed the game a little bit. And I think espouses the values of the school a little bit more than any bird can.
Love it.
No birds here. We've heard it loud and clear from a soon-to-be grad of HBS. Well, this has been fascinating, and just even though we both know you, so interesting to hear your perspective and dig a bit deeper. I guess to end it off, why don't we have you give our listeners one last piece of advice as they approach this business school application?
Yeah, I think you're going to encounter people who don't believe in it. And they might be your family members, they might be your business colleagues. And I think, don't be discouraged when you meet that person. You'll find people who say, it's too expensive, et cetera, et cetera. Like they haven't been through it. You'll find people who haven't been through it, who are naysayers. Don't let them kind of dissuade you, and just really try and focus on getting the application in. You probably stand a better chance than you think you have in your own head.
That's it for this week. Thank you all so much for joining. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed recording it. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe, rate, review, and share with friends. It will help us be able to make more content. Additionally, follow us on social media. We're on Instagram at How Did You Get In? There are periods between each of those words on Instagram. And feel free to submit listener questions. If you have specific topics that you think we should be diving into more deeply, don't hesitate. Shoot us the question and we'll feature it on an upcoming pod. Once again, thank you so much.